why bad things happen to good people. To find comfort and make sense of this pain, humans have historically sought solutions in supernatural myths, blaming angry gods, curses, or wicked ancestors for their suffering. In The Magic of Reality, Richard Dawkins shatters these fictional illusions to reveal the brilliant, evidence-based scientific truths behind life's biggest mysteries. Listen and discover why the real scientific explanations of our universe are actually far more beautiful, inspiring, and magical than any ancient fairy tale. Let's find out more.
That is quite the heavy opening to start us off. Yeah. But honestly, it is the only place we can really start this deep dive. Because what we are looking at today, it is not just a straightforward science lesson. It is kind of like a conceptual exorcism.
An exorcism. I didn't bring any holy water to the studio today.
You are not going to need it. We are looking at how to exorcise the spooky stuff from the way we view the world. You know, the ghosts, the curses, the angry rain gods. And the core argument in our source material today is that when you clear away all that mythological smoke, what is actually left over isn't some cold, boring, sterile world. It is actually way more magical than the myths ever were.
Right. He calls it poetic magic. And I definitely want to get into that definition early on, because I think people hear the word science and they immediately picture a dusty textbook. They think of dissecting a frog in 10th grade biology and just taking all the joy and mystery right out of the universe.
Exactly. There is that really famous complaint by the poet John Keats. He said that Isaac Newton unweaved the rainbow by explaining how light works. Keats genuinely thought that by turning a beautiful rainbow into a simple diagram of prismatic colors, the beauty was totally destroyed.
Like breaking down a magic trick so it's not fun anymore.
Right. And our mission today for this deep dive is to basically prove Keats wrong. We want to show that understanding the actual mechanism, the reality of how things work, it actually amplifies the wonder.
So to do that, we really have to agree on what reality actually is, which sounds like a Philosophy 101 question. And honestly, reading through the first section of the source material, I caught myself thinking, well, I know this. Reality is just what is real. It feels incredibly simple.
It feels like a tautology, doesn't it?
It really does. Like if I stub my toe on a rock, it hurts. That is reality. If I drink my coffee, which I desperately need right now, by the way, I wake up. Reality. But the book points out pretty quickly that just trusting our five senses is actually a terrible way to define what is real.
It is a very limited way to define it. I mean, think about our biology. Human beings are basically built to survive on the African savanna. Our eyes evolved to spot ripe fruit in a tree or to see a predator hiding in the tall grass. Our ears are tuned to hear a twig snap behind us. We are absolutely not biologically engineered to see atoms, or to hear radio waves, or to feel the slow movement of tectonic plates.
So we are just walking around with this incredibly narrow slice of perception.
A tiny, tiny slice. The book calls it the narrow slit of reality. If the entire spectrum of reality was a massive ruler that stretched all the way from New York to Los Angeles, the part we can actually perceive with our naked eyes is about the width of a single dime.
Wow, that is incredibly humbling. So if we only trusted our raw senses, we would have to say dinosaurs aren't real. Because I have definitely never seen a live dinosaur walking down the street.
Exactly. If you stick rigidly to the idea of, if I cannot see it, then it is not real, you lose all of deep history. You lose the distant universe. You lose the microscopic world. So the book posits that true reality has to include the unseen. And we basically have three distinct ways to get at that unseen stuff.
Right, the tools of extension. This is where we get into the cool gadgets.
But it helps to think of them as prosthetics for our senses. Like a telescope is essentially just a giant artificial eye. But it does something your biological eye could never do. It acts as a literal time machine.
I absolutely loved this concept in the reading. I mean, I know light takes time to travel. Everyone learns that the speed of light is finite. But the way it is framed here, when you look up at the sun in the sky, you're not actually seeing the sun right now.
No, you are seeing the sun as it was 8 minutes ago. If the sun somehow instantly imploded right this very second, while we were sitting here talking, we wouldn't even know it. We would just be sitting here happily chatting away for 8 full minutes before the lights finally went out.
Which is a deeply terrifying thought to just keep hovering in the back of your mind.
But scale that concept up. Think about looking at the Andromeda Galaxy through a powerful telescope. You are looking at light that left its source 2.5 million years ago. You are literally looking at a ghost of that galaxy. You are seeing a piece of reality exactly as it existed before Homo sapiens even walked on the Earth.
So reality is literally layered in time. The further out you look, the further back you are seeing.
Precisely. And then you can go in the complete opposite direction.
Downward.
Into the microscopic reality. We had absolutely no idea that bacteria existed for the vast majority of human history. People genuinely thought terrible diseases were caused by bad air or miasma.
Or curses from witches.
Or witches, yes. But the bacteria were always there. They were always a part of reality. We just lacked the specific tool, the microscope, to extend our vision down to their level. So the true definition of reality has to be everything that exists, whether we can detect it with our naked monkey eyes or not.
But then there is a third category of reality mentioned, and this is the one that I think trips a lot of people up. Things we cannot see with our eyes, and things we cannot even see with a super powerful microscope. But we know they are absolutely real because of models.
Yes, this is the real detective work of science. The third way of knowing.
The example from the text that really stuck with me was the discovery of DNA, Watson and Crick. Because in my head, I always just pictured them looking through some billion-dollar microscope and suddenly shouting, "Aha! I see a double helix."
Which is how the movies always portray it, but it is completely false.
Yeah.
You cannot just see a DNA molecule in that way. Certainly not with the technology in the 1950s. The physical wavelength of visible light is just too clunky and big to resolve something that incredibly small.
So how did they actually figure it out?
They built a physical model, literally. They cut little shapes out of sheet metal and cardboard. They knew a few scattered facts. They knew the basic chemistry of the bases. They knew the angles that certain atomic bonds had to form. And they had Rosalind Franklin's X-ray diffraction data, which didn't show the structure directly, but gave them kind of a blurry mathematical shadow of the structure.
So they're essentially playing with very advanced Legos.
Sophisticated molecular Legos, yeah. They just kept trying to fit these cardboard and metal pieces together in a way that didn't violate the known laws of physics. They would say, well, if we put this carbon atom here, it physically crashes into that oxygen atom over there, so that won't work. And eventually, by pure trial and error and mathematics, they found this singular shape that satisfied all the physical requirements, the double helix.
And then that model just became the accepted reality?
Because it worked perfectly. It successfully predicted exactly how genetics should function and replicate. And then, decades later, when we finally did develop much better scanning tools, we confirmed that their model was exactly right. So reality inherently includes these models, these theoretical constructs we build in our minds or in our labs that perfectly predict how the universe behaves.
Another great example of that was Gregor Mendel with his peas.
Oh, exactly. Mendel didn't know what a gene was. He couldn't see genes. He was just a monk counting smooth peas and wrinkled peas in his garden.
Right, but his mathematical model of how those traits were passed down predicted the existence of genes long before we ever had the tools to find them.
That is the power of a good model. It reveals the unseen reality.
Okay, so if that is reality, the seen, the unseen, and the modeled, what exactly is magic? Because the title of the book we are diving into is The Magic of Reality.
The author is very specific with his definitions here. He breaks magic down into 3 distinct types, and we basically need to completely discard 2 of them to get to the good stuff.
First on the chopping block is supernatural magic.
Right. This is your classic fairy tale stuff. Aladdin rubbing a magic lamp. Cinderella's fairy godmother turning a pumpkin into a golden coach. Or a witch turning a handsome prince into a frog. The book is very blunt about this. This simply does not happen. Pumpkins do not spontaneously reorganize their atoms to become wooden coaches in the real world.
Then there is the second type, which is stage magic.
Which is incredibly fun. It is illusions and sleight of hand, pulling rabbits out of top hats. But we, as the audience, know it is a trick. We know the magician hasn't actually sawed his assistant in half, because if we thought he really did, we would be screaming and calling the police instead of politely clapping.
That is a very fair point. But then we hit the third type, poetic magic.
This is the ultimate goal. This is that profound feeling of awe. It is the literal goosebumps you get on your arms when you hear a perfect piece of orchestral music, or when you stand on the rim of the Grand Canyon at sunset, or when you look up at a pitch-black, star-filled sky and suddenly realize just how unimaginably small you are.
It is the emotional reaction to a profound truth.
Yes, and the entire argument of this deep dive is that the scientific truth, knowing what that star actually is, knowing the geological forces that carved out that canyon over millions of years, it doesn't kill that awe-inspiring feeling. It enhances it.
Okay, so let us take this poetic magic lens and apply it to one of the biggest, most fundamental questions human beings have ever asked. It is our next major topic. Who was the first person?
Ah, yes. The ultimate origin story.
Now, I am going to play the skeptic here for a minute, or at least the confused layperson, because even if I fully accept the science of evolution, pure logic tells my brain that there had to be a first one.
Go on, explain the logic.
Well, look at me. I have parents. They were definitely human, and their parents were human. But if I follow that ancestral chain back far enough, millions and millions of years, eventually I have to hit an ancestor who was not human.
Right.
An ape-like creature.
That is biologically correct.
So logically, there must be a specific, identifiable moment in history where a mommy ape gave birth to a baby human. There has to be a hard break in the chain somewhere.
And that logic, while it feels incredibly intuitive to us, is completely wrong. It is a victim of what the author calls the tyranny of the discontinuous mind.
The tyranny of the discontinuous mind. That honestly sounds like a progressive rock album from the 70s.
It really does. But it describes how our brains operate. We desperately love to put things into neat little boxes. We love to say, this is category A and this is category B. But the reality of nature doesn't care about our rigid little boxes.
So break it down for me. Why wasn't there a first person?
Let us use the core thought experiment from the source text. I want you to imagine you're holding a stack of photographs.
Okay, I have a stack of photos.
The very top photograph is a picture of you. The photo directly underneath that one is your father. Under that, his father. And so on.
So I'm holding an incredibly tall stack of my grandfathers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now imagine this stack is ridiculously tall. It goes back millions of years. Let us start pulling photos out and looking at them. You look at your grandfather. He is human, right?
Obviously.
You go down the stack 10 generations. You look at that photo. The clothes are probably pretty funny. Maybe the person is a bit shorter due to diet, but definitely undoubtedly human.
Yes, still human.
Go back 1,000 generations.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking deep pre-civilization now. Nomadic hunter-gatherers. But biologically speaking, they are still Homo sapiens.
Still completely human.
Now, let us aggressively fast forward, or fast backward, I guess, down the stack to 6 million years ago. You pull out a photo from that era. What do you see?
Well, based on the timeline, I see a chimp.
You see an ancestor that looks very much like a modern ape. It has a heavy, protruding brow ridge. It is covered in thick fur. It is definitely not a human being. If you saw this creature sitting next to you on the subway, you would panic and call animal control.
Okay, I'm with you. So I have a photo of a modern human at the top of the stack and a photo of an ape at the very bottom.
Correct. But here's the trick. Here is the part that breaks the discontinuous mind. I want you to go through that entire stack and find the exact place where the change happened. I want you to find the one specific photo where the father is an ape, but the son is a human.
But it has to be in there somewhere the change happened.
It isn't in there. And here's the fundamental reason why. Let us say you pull out photo number 1 million. It is an ape-like creature. Let us look at his direct son at photo number 999,999. Is that son a completely different species than his father?
Well, no. I mean, a species always gives birth to its own species. A dog doesn't give birth to a cat.
Exactly. There is never, not once in the entire 4 billion year history of life on Earth, been a single instance of a parent giving birth to a child of a completely different species. It is biologically impossible. A giraffe does not give birth to a horse. A Homo erectus does not give birth to a Homo sapiens. Every single child ever born belonged to the exact same species as its parents.
But then how did we get here? If every single step is exactly the same as the one before it, how does the final destination change so drastically?
Gradualism. It is imperceptible, microscopic change over vast oceans of time. Think about your own life. You are an adult right now.
Mostly, yes.
But you were once a baby.
True.
Can you look back at your life and tell me the exact date, the specific Tuesday, when you definitively stopped being a baby and became a toddler?
No, of course not. It is a total blur. 1 month I was just crawling on the rug, and then a few months later I was walking into coffee tables.
Right. You didn't go to sleep on Monday night as a baby and wake up on Tuesday morning as a toddler.
Yeah.
Every single day, you change by a tiny fraction of a percent. Evolution is exactly that, but spread out over millions of years. Every child is ever so slightly different from the parent. Maybe a tiny bit less body hair. Maybe the spine is just a millimeter straighter.
But in any single generation, that difference is way too small to even notice.
Completely invisible to the naked eye. But if you stack up 1 million of those tiny invisible changes, you smoothly transition from a tree-swinging ape to a podcast-hosting human. There is no sharp dividing line.
That really messes with your brain's desire for clean categories. It essentially means that the concept of human isn't a fixed, static thing. It is just a temporary snapshot in a flowing river of DNA.
That is a beautiful way to put it. We are just a flowing river And this completely solves the first-person riddle. There was no first person, just as there was no first toddler. There was just a long, incredibly slow dawn of humanity.
So that perfectly explains the vertical timeline. We are all just one long, blurry line stretching all the way back to single-celled bacteria. But that naturally leads us right into our next topic. Why are there so many different kinds of animals?
Right, because if it's just one continuous line of slight changes, why do we have towering giraffes and tiny ants and massive blue whales? Why didn't life just stay as one single type of evolving blob?
The source material throws some pretty crazy numbers at us to highlight this. 231 different types of carnivores, 2,000 distinct types of rodents, nearly 1,000 different types of bats. How did one line branch out into so many?
The answer comes down to separation, or to use the formal biological term, speciation through geographic isolation. And Dawkins uses the Galapagos Islands as the absolute perfect natural laboratory to explain this.
This is the classic Charles Darwin example.
He's the gold standard example. I want you to imagine a generic ancestral iguana just living its life on the mainland of South America millions of years ago.
Okay, I am picturing a normal iguana just chilling on a rock.
Now imagine a massive tropical hurricane hits the coast. A violent storm rips entire trees out of the ground. A huge tangle of logs and vines and mud gets washed out of a river estuary and swept directly into the open ocean. And desperately clinging to that floating raft of debris are a handful of these mainland iguanas.
They're having a profoundly bad day.
A terrible day. They float out at sea for weeks. Most of them die of thirst or exposure. But a few incredibly lucky ones wash up on the jagged volcanic rocks of the newly formed Galapagos Islands. They crawl off the raft. They survive.
But they're completely stuck there.
They're totally stranded. The vast Pacific Ocean is an impassable barrier. They cannot get back to the mainland to meet with their original cousins. They're entirely on their own. Now, the environment on the Galapagos is very different from the lush mainland. Maybe the food is much harder to find on the land. Maybe the volcanic rocks are pitch black instead of brown.
So the iguanas that happen to be slightly better at swimming or happen to have slightly darker skin to hide on the black rocks from predators, those are the ones that survive and have babies.
Precisely. Natural selection starts aggressively nudging this isolated population in a brand new direction. Back on the mainland, the original iguanas basically stay the same because their environment hasn't changed. But on the island, over thousands and thousands of generations, they start to shift. They develop larger, sharper claws to grip the slippery, wet rocks. They actually learn how to voluntarily slow their heart rates so they can dive deep underwater to graze on algae and seaweed.
They transform into the marine iguana,
which literally looks like a miniature Godzilla. Now here is the crucial final part of the speciation process. Imagine that 1 million years go by, and due to geological shifts, the sea level drops dramatically and a temporary land bridge forms. And the marine iguanas decide to walk back to the South American mainland.
It is a grand family reunion.
You would certainly think so. But if they try to mate with the mainland iguanas, they quickly find that they cannot. The genetic keys no longer fit the biological locks. Their DNA has drifted too far apart during that 1 million years of separation. They are now two entirely distinct species that can never interbreed again.
And that is exactly how you get planetary diversity. You take a group, you split them in half with a mountain range or an ocean, they drift apart genetically, and they can never get back together.
And Dawkins uses this incredible intuitive analogy to explain how that genetic drift actually feels on a human level. He compares it directly to human language.
Yes. The Latin example, this is the moment in the book where it really clicked for me.
Think about the height of the Roman Empire. Everyone in the empire spoke Latin. They spread that specific language all over the continent of Europe, into the regions we now call France, Spain, and Italy.
But then the empire eventually collapses, the Roman roads rot away, the constant trade and communication networks just stop.
That is the isolation event. The people living in the region of France stop talking to the people living in the region of Portugal. Now in France, maybe the locals start naturally slurring the ends of their words a bit. In Italy, maybe they start enthusiastically adding hard vowels to the ends of their words.
Local slang slowly becomes the official grammar.
Exactly. The original Latin drifts. Give it 1,000 years of pure isolation. Now you have a modern Frenchman and a modern Italian meeting in a cafe. They both absolutely started with the exact same ancestral language, Latin. But now, They cannot understand a single word the other person is saying.
They are essentially reproductively isolated, but linguistically.
French and Italian are just descendant species of Latin, in the exact same way that modern humans and modern chimpanzees are descendant species of that common ape ancestor from 6 million years ago. We are literally just different biological dialects in the exact same genetic language.
It makes the entire natural world feel so deeply connected. I love that phrasing. We're all just different dialects of the same original language of life.
It is a deeply poetic way to view reality.
Okay, so we have looked at the massive, sweeping history of life. Now let us zoom in, way in, to the literal building blocks. Our next major topic is, what are things actually made of?
We are firmly entering the bizarre realm of the atom.
And specifically, there is a revelation in this chapter that genuinely made me stop reading and just stare at my own hand for 5 minutes in total disbelief.
Let me take a wild guess. The empty space revelation.
The empty space revelation. It broke my brain. But before we get to the empty space, we definitely should tip our hat to the ancient Greeks, specifically Democritus.
Yes. He had an absolutely brilliant moment of intuition thousands of years ago. He posed a simple thought experiment. He asked, if I take a piece of cheese and I slice it exactly in half with a knife, and then I take that half and slice it in half again, and I just keep going smaller and smaller, do I go on forever into infinity? Or do I eventually hit a fundamental piece of cheese that is so small it physically cannot be cut anymore?
And he just logically decided there had to be a hard limit.
Right. He called that fundamental, uncuttable limit tomos, which is the Greek word for cut, and he put an A in front of it, which means not. Eopomos. Uncuttable.
Oh, the atom.
Now, of course, Democritus couldn't physically prove it. He didn't have the tools of extension. But his intuition was spot on. Everything in the universe is made of these fundamental units. We have elements, like pure gold or iron or oxygen. An element is just a substance that is made up of only one specific kind of atom.
Versus a compound, which is a mix, like water is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom holding hands.
Exactly. But the really mind-bending poetic part of this section is when the author describes how atoms arrange themselves in solid objects, specifically crystals.
He calls it atoms on parade.
Yes. If you look closely at a diamond, it is a crystal. That means the carbon atoms inside it are not just jumbled together randomly. They are lined up in a rigid, perfect, three-dimensional lattice formation, just like highly disciplined soldiers standing in formation on a parade ground. That rigid structure is exactly why a diamond is so incredibly hard. The atoms are locked into place.
Right. So you look at a diamond, or you knock on a heavy wooden table, or you look at a solid rock and your brain tells you that object is solid. That thing is completely chock full of dense stuff.
But reality tells us it absolutely isn't.
You have to walk us through the scale here, because I think people hear the phrase atoms have empty space, but they don't visually realize how much space we are actually talking about.
Okay, let us build a mental model right now to really visualize it. Let us take one single carbon atom out of that solid diamond. Right in the very center of the atom, you have the nucleus. That is where the protons and neutrons live.
The heavy, dense center.
Let us magically blow that tiny nucleus up until it is roughly the size of a regulation football.
Okay, I'm holding the football.
Now walk that football down and place it exactly on the 50-yard line in the dead center of a massive football stadium.
Got it. It's sitting on the grass.
Now where are the electrons that orbit that nucleus?
See, intuitively, I assume they are buzzing right around the goalposts, or maybe flying around up in the nosebleed section of the stadium seats.
Not even remotely close. If the nucleus is that football on the 50-yard line, the electrons are like tiny little gnats buzzing around 15 kilometers away.
Wait, 15 kilometers. That is literally the next town over.
Yes. I want you to imagine a giant sphere that is roughly 30 kilometers wide in total diameter. In the absolute dead center of that massive sphere is one single football. On the very outer edge of the sphere are a few tiny gnats zipping around. And what is occupying all the space in between the football and the gnats?
Nothing, like actually nothing.
Absolute vacuum, pure empty space.
So a solid diamond is mostly just empty space.
A diamond, a boulder, a bar of solid iron. They are almost entirely empty vacuum. If you somehow took the entire human race, all 8 billion of us currently living on Earth, and you scientifically removed all the empty space from inside our atoms, squeezing us down so only the solid nuclei were touching, do you have any idea how big the human race would be?
I cannot even begin to guess. The size of a house? A car?
We would all easily fit inside a single sugar cube.
All 8 billion people.
Every single human being compressed into a sugar cube. That is how fundamentally empty physical matter actually is.
Okay, so I am forced to ask the incredibly obvious question here. If I am 99.9% empty space, and this wooden chair I am currently sitting on is 99.9% empty space, why don't I just fall right through it? Why aren't we all just ghosting through walls and falling into the center of the Earth?
This brings us right back to the concept of invisible forces in models.
Mhm.
Because interacting with reality at that level, it isn't solid stuff hitting solid stuff. It is actually force fields interacting with other force fields.
Like the deflector shields on Star Trek.
That's basically exactly what it is. The electrons orbiting the atoms in your body carry a negative electrical charge. The electrons orbiting the atoms in the chair you were sitting on also have a negative charge. What happens when you try to push the negative ends of two strong magnets together?
They repel each other. They actively push back against your hands.
Exactly. When you sit down on a chair, you are not actually touching it in a solid sense. The electrons in your pants are hovering a tiny microscopic distance above the electrons in the wood, fiercely suspended by that electromagnetic repulsion. You are literally floating on an invisible force field.
So that hard, solid feeling I get when I knock on wood isn't matter. It is just electromagnetic force.
It is pure energetic resistance. And that, to me, is where the profound magic is. The scientific reality of force fields and empty atomic vacuums is so much stranger and so much cooler than the simplistic idea of rocks are just hard.
I am genuinely going to have trouble sitting in this chair for the rest of the deep dive without thinking about the fact that I am hovering. But we need to keep moving. Let us totally shift gears and zoom all the way out, from the microscopic quantum realm to the grand planetary scale. The next major topics are about the rhythms of our planet. Why do we have day and night, and why do we have winter and summer?
These are the fundamental rhythms that have dictated human civilization since the beginning. And historically, because they were so vital for farming and survival, they were the source of some of our most elaborate myths.
Right, the classic myths of fiery chariots being pulled across the sky by angry gods.
Because intuitively, from our narrow slice of perception, it really looks like the sun is moving across the sky while we stand perfectly still. But we know now, thanks to centuries of astronomical models and direct observation, that it is the Earth spinning like a giant top that gives us the illusion of the sun rising and setting.
Day and night is easy enough to grasp, but the seasons, this is where a surprisingly large number of people, even highly educated modern people, get it completely wrong.
It is an incredibly common misconception. If you walk out onto the street right now and ask a random person why it gets so cold in the winter, a huge percentage of them will confidently tell you, oh, it's because the Earth's orbit takes it further away from the sun.
Which makes perfect intuitive sense. If you are standing near a campfire and you walk backward away from the fire, you get colder.
It feels logical, but Dawkins systematically destroys this myth in the book with one incredibly simple piece of observable logic. He calls it the Australian Christmas proof.
I love this argument so much. It is so simple, but it totally demolishes the distance theory.
Think about it. If winter was actually caused by the entire planet Earth moving further away from the sun in space, then the whole planet would be further away at the exact same time. So it would logically have to be winter everywhere on Earth simultaneously.
But in places like Australia or South Africa, December is the peak of their summer. They are literally out barbecuing on the beach in bikinis while we are shoveling freezing snow in the northern hemisphere.
Exactly. So planetary distance physically cannot be the cause of the seasons. In fact, due to the slightly elliptical shape of our orbit, the Earth is actually a little bit closer to the sun in January, which is the dead of winter for the North.
So if it isn't distance, what is the actual mechanical cause?
It is all about the tilt. The Earth is spinning, but it is not spinning perfectly straight up and down relative to its orbit. It's leaning over at an angle of 23.5 degrees.
It has a permanent gangsta lean.
Exactly. It is leaning. So during a certain part of the year, the North Pole is physically leaning toward the sun. That means the northern hemisphere gets very direct, concentrated sunlight. Think of pointing a strong flashlight directly at a wall straight on. It makes a tight, bright, hot circle of light.
That concentrated energy is summer.
Yes. Then 6 months later, the Earth has traveled to the exact opposite side of the sun. The tilt of the axis hasn't changed its orientation in space, which means the North Pole is now leaning away from the sun. Now, that exact same sunlight is hitting the northern hemisphere at a severe slant. Think of tilting that flashlight so the beam hits the wall at a sharp angle. The circle of light stretches out into a long, pale oval. It is much dimmer.
It is the exact same amount of solar energy, but it is smeared out over a much larger surface area, so it feels weaker.
It's exactly. Weaker, diluted light. And because of the geometry of the lean, the sun doesn't stay in the sky as long. Shorter, colder days. That is winter.
He also specifically mentions the extremes, like the Arctic Circle.
Right, the famous land of the midnight sun. Because of that 23-degree tilt in the peak of midsummer, the top of the globe is leaning so far into the light that as the Earth rotates, the Arctic Circle literally never spins into the shadow. The sun just slowly rolls around the horizon in a circle. It is perpetual daylight for weeks.
And conversely, at the equator, right in the middle.
The equatorial bulge doesn't really care about the tilt. It gets relatively direct sunlight all year round, which is why places near the equator don't really have a traditional winter or summer. It's just consistently hot.
Now, closely tied to this whole discussion of our place in the solar system are topics 6 and 7, the reality of the sun and the reality of rainbows.
Yes. Let us look at the sun first. In ancient mythology, it is literally a living god. It is a divine person with a personality. But in scientific reality, it is a main sequence star. It is a completely mind-boggling nuclear fusion reactor suspended in a vacuum 93 million miles away from us.
And again, bringing back that light minutes concept from earlier, we are intimately tied to a reaction that happened 8 minutes in the past.
It is the ultimate source of almost all our planetary energy. Every single bit of food you have ever eaten, every bit of warmth you feel on your skin, ultimately originated from the nuclear fire of that specific star. Understanding that deep physical connection, the fact that we are literally solar-powered biological machines living on a tilted rock, it is incredibly profound.
And then rainbows. This brings us full circle right back to Keats and Newton.
It does. A rainbow is the ultimate textbook example of poetic magic in action.
So, on a purely mechanical, physical level, what exactly is a rainbow?
It is a giant atmospheric prism. When it rains while the sun is shining, millions of tiny spherical water droplets are suspended in the air. When the white sunlight enters one of those water drops, it slows down and bends. This is called refraction. But the trick is, different colors of light bend at slightly different angles. Red light bends just a little bit, while violet light bends a lot more.
So the droplet essentially physically tears the white light apart.
Unweaves it, as Keats would mournfully say. It spreads that white light out into its constituent spectrum of colors, reflects it off the back of the raindrop, and beams it right into your eye.
And honestly, does knowing that complex optical geometry make looking at a rainbow any less beautiful?
I strongly argue that it doesn't. I think looking at a giant rainbow arcing over a valley and knowing that you are literally seeing the hidden internal anatomy of light itself, knowing that the precise spherical geometry of millions of falling raindrops is perfectly aligning with the angle of your specific eye to paint that glowing arc in the sky, that feels like an incredible privilege to understand.
It completely transforms a pretty colorful picture into a visceral experience of a universal law.
Exactly. It elevates the experience.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground. We have explored the seen, the unseen, the deep past, the quantum space inside atoms, and the orbital mechanics of our planet. Now, for the final section of our deep dive, let us push out to the very edges of the map, the unknown, the scary, and the future.
This brings us to topic 9. The ultimate question, are we alone in the universe?
Which I think ties back incredibly nicely to our early discussion about the definition of reality.
How so? Connect the dots.
Well, just because we haven't officially seen any aliens yet, that doesn't mean they aren't real. Remember, we physically couldn't see microscopic bacteria for 99% of human history. We thought disease was magic.
Right. That is a fantastic parallel. The grand sum of reality likely contains incredibly massive things and possibly highly intelligent beings that we simply haven't detected yet because our tools aren't looking in the right place or in the right way. Dawkins suggests that we must continuously use our instruments of extension to search the dark. We use massive arrays of radio telescopes to actively listen for non-natural signals across the void.
We are essentially cupping a giant metallic ear to the cosmos, just waiting to catch a faint whisper from someone else.
And if we do finally catch a signal, it violently expands our definition of reality once again, in the exact same way that discovering the microscopic world completely revolutionized medicine and biology.
Now, topic 10 shifts us from the vast unknown of space to something much closer to home, but equally terrifying for early humans: earthquakes.
Again, we see mythology desperately trying to handle the sheer terror of random destruction. In traditional Japanese folklore, there was a very famous myth of a giant magical catfish that lived deep in the mud beneath the islands of Japan. And whenever this monstrous fish got angry and thrashed its tail, the ground violently shook.
Which, as a story, is a really cool visual image, but it is profoundly unhelpful if you are trying to predict when the next one will happen or how to keep your family safe.
Right, you cannot engineer a building to withstand an angry magical fish. The scientific reality is plate tectonics. The crust of the Earth is not a solid, unbroken shell. It is cracked into these massive, incredibly heavy rocky plates that are literally floating and drifting on a deep ocean of some molten magma. And sometimes the jagged edges of these floating plates violently grind against each other and get stuck. Pressure builds up for centuries and then suddenly snaps.
It is way less angry water monster and much more terrifying planetary mechanics.
But knowing that mechanical reality actually empowers us, it allows us to invent seismographs. It allows us to engineer shock-absorbing foundations for skyscrapers. It structurally moves the phenomenon from a mysterious, unavoidable curse from the gods into a manageable physical risk that human ingenuity can mitigate.
Which perfectly leads us into the heaviest topic of the book, topic 11, the question we open the entire show with. Why do bad things happen?
This is the true emotional core. Why is there physical pain? Why is there terrible suffering in the world?
The ancient mythological answer is usually you sinned, or you have bad karma, or your ancestors were cursed by an angry deity.
Which is an incredibly toxic and psychologically damaging way to live, because it constantly makes you feel like every random tragedy is secretly your fault, or that the entire universe is consciously out to punish you.
Dawkins offers a strictly evolutionary explanation for pain. He frames it as a biological trade-off.
Right. Pain is not a cosmic punishment for stealing an apple. Pain is a highly evolved, vital warning system. If you had a genetic mutation where you literally could not feel physical pain, you wouldn't automatically jerk your hand away from a burning hot stove. You would just stand there and let your hand burn to the bone. You would likely die very young. So the brutal sensation of pain evolved specifically to keep organisms alive long enough to reproduce.
I can grasp the logic of pain from a hot stove or a sharp rock, but what about internal diseases? What about the really bad stuff like cancer or autoimmune disorders?
There is a really fascinating bit of biological speculation in the source material regarding exactly this. The author asks the question, why do we even have autoimmune diseases? Why does the human body, which is usually so brilliant at surviving, suddenly decide to viciously attack its own healthy joints or organs?
Yeah, that genuinely seems like a terrible design flaw. Why would my own immune system actively try to destroy me?
But you have to consider the alternative scenario. We evolved an immune system that is specifically designed to ruthlessly hunt down and kill rogue, mutating cells. Things like precancerous cells that pop up in our bodies every single day. The immune system is basically an elite biological SWAT team. It is a completely ruthless killer of anything that looks even slightly suspicious.
Okay, I follow. A hyper-aggressive internal SWAT team.
Now, perhaps these terrible autoimmune diseases are just the tragic, unfortunate side effect of an immune system that is simply too vigilant. The harsh biological trade-off is essentially this. The body says, I am going to aggressively and violently attack absolutely anything that looks remotely suspicious so that you do not die of aggressive cancer when you were 5 years old. But the cost of that hyperaggression is that sometimes I am going to accidentally mistake a healthy thyroid cell or a healthy joint tissue for a lethal threat.
So the objectively bad thing, the debilitating autoimmune disease, might just be the inescapable evolutionary cost of the extremely good thing, which is not dying of cancer before you can grow up.
Exactly. It is absolutely not a curse from a witch. It is a brutal biological balancing act. It is a mechanical compromise of evolution. And deeply understanding that reality doesn't magically take the physical pain away, of course, but it completely removes the existential dread of the supernatural. It transforms suffering into a complex mechanical problem to be eventually solved by medical science, rather than a moral failure to be solved by animal sacrifice or guilt.
And that brings us to the final capstone concept of the book, topic 12. What exactly is a miracle?
We touched on this briefly at the very beginning with the definition of magic, but we need to firmly drill down into it to close this out. A miracle is traditionally defined by religions as a direct supernatural suspension of the known laws of physics.
Like a stone statue in a church suddenly weeping real human blood, or a terminally sick person being instantly cured by touching a holy relic.
Dawkins makes a very bold philosophical argument here. He states that if a so-called miracle actually happens in the physical world, then by definition, it is not a miracle.
Wait, you're going to have to run that logic by me one more time.
Think about it. If a stone statue genuinely starts weeping red fluid, A rigorous scientist doesn't just throw up their hands and say, well, I guess God did it, let's go home. A scientist gets a vial of the fluid and asks questions. Is there a rare strain of red bacteria growing in the porous stone? Is it an elaborate hoax by the local monks? Is there some bizarre capillary action drawing rusty water up from the foundation that we just don't have a model for yet?
Right, because if it actually physically occurs in our universe, then it is automatically a part of reality. It has a physical cause, even if it is a really weird one.
Exactly. If it happens, it is entirely natural. We just might not have built the proper scientific model to fully explain it yet. The word supernatural is really just a placeholder. It is just a linguistic bucket we use to hold natural phenomena that we don't understand yet. Lightning used to be supernatural. Now it is just atmospheric electricity.
So let us pull all of these incredible threads together and bring this deep dive home. We have been on a pretty massive conceptual journey today.
We really have. We started down in the mud with the ancient myths. The fairy tales of frogs magically turning into handsome princes.
And we completely replaced those myths with the slow, magnificent, and scientifically proven magic of Darwinian evolution, slowly shaping life over millions and millions of years.
We zoomed all the way out to the edges of the galaxy and realized the profound time machine nature of light and telescopes.
And then we zoomed all the way back in to the dizzying empty space inside a solid diamond, where electrons orbit a nucleus like tiny gnats swarming a football in a massive stadium.
We looked closely at the gentle 23-degree tilt of the Earth's axis that provides us with the eternal rhythm of the seasons.
And we finally realized that terrible things like earthquakes and diseases aren't vindictive curses from the heavens, but rather tectonic plate mechanics and harsh evolutionary trade-offs.
The final verdict from Dawkins and from this deep dive is overwhelmingly clear. Reality is not cold or boring just because we can mathematically explain it.
No way. The explanation itself is the magic. The incredible fact that we are literally constructed out of heavy atoms that were forged in the dying hearts of collapsed stars. The fact that we share a common genetic ancestor with the kangaroo, the oak tree, and the bacteria in our gut. The fact that we are spinning through a vacuum on a tilted rock suspended by gravity. All of that scientific truth is infinitely more poetic and inspiring than any fabricated fairy tale could ever hope to be.
It is the magic of reality. It is wonderful specifically because it is real.
And before we go, here is a final provocative thought to leave you with, to just let simmer in your brain. We talked a lot today about how we use instruments like microscopes and radio arrays to see things that we physically cannot sense naturally, things like X-rays or distant galaxies.
Right, expanding our narrow slit of reality.
Exactly. So if our biological senses, our eyes and ears, only perceive a tiny fractional sliver of the actual universe, what massive, fundamentally world-changing parts of reality are sitting right in front of our faces, right in the very room with you right now, just waiting for human beings to build the right model to finally see them? What invisible forces or entirely new colors are we completely oblivious to simply because we haven't invented the right telescope for them yet?
That is an incredibly provocative thought to end on. The true unknown is right here. It's just waiting for us.
Thank you for watching, Alana. Please like, share, subscribe, follow up in next topic.